approach, connoisseurs of tales, to the banquet of haunted hearts, where stories are served with the delicacy and richness deserving of StoryWave.ai's craft. Feast with us by liking, sharing, and subscribing for a new delicacy every day. Chapter 1, The Calm Before. The scent of burning sage mingled with the damp earth as Evangeline Dubois, a slender figure cloaked in the mysteries of Creole voodoo, moved with a grace that belied the urgency in her heart. Her raven-black hair framed a face where emerald eyes shone like twin beacons in the twilight of her modest bayou abode. The crescent moon's scar on her right cheek was barely visible under the flickering candlelight as she carefully placed the final herb into the cauldron. Tonight, the townspeople of Saint-Denis celebrated All Hallows' Eve with masked revelry and the laughter of children echoing through the cobblestone streets. But in the dimly lit corners of her sanctuary, Evangeline's thoughts were consumed by the man whose muscular frame now lay still upon her bed, his once vibrant steel-blue eyes dimmed by the shadow of illness. "Bastien," she whispered, her husky voice a melody of sorrow and devotion. Sebastien LaRue, the sailor who had captured her heart, had returned from his latest voyage with a fever that no doctor could explain and no medicine could quell. Outside, the crow, Evangeline's spirit companion, cawed a foreboding message from atop the moss-covered oak that watched over her home like a sentinel. The celebration's joy did not reach the walls of this sanctuary, where the air was heavy with impending loss. In the town square, Gerard Moreau, known as the Iron Marshal, observed the festivities with dark brown eyes that missed nothing. His stocky build was a history to years of military discipline, and his voice carried the weight of authority that commanded immediate respect. "Maintain order," he directed his men, his demeanor as unforgiving as the jagged scar across his brow. Meanwhile, Charlotte Vance, the navigator known to her friends as Lottie, navigated the crowds with athletic ease. Her sun-kissed blonde hair and sky-blue eyes reflected the light of the bonfires as she shared warm greetings with the townsfolk. Her crisp voice carried over the din, a reminder of the camaraderie that had long united the residents of Saint-Denis. Back in the seclusion of her home, Evangeline cared for Sebastien with a tenderness that belied her stoic exterior. She bathed his brow with water from the bayou and whispered incantations meant to strengthen his spirit. But as the evening wore on, his breaths became more labored, the life force within him flickering like the candlelight that struggled against the encroaching darkness. "I will not lose you, mon amour," she vowed, her voice barely above a murmur. Sebastian's response was a groan that twisted Evangeline's heart, a sound more akin to the deep groaning of the undead than the robust sailor she adored. His once muscular body now betrayed him with spasms that spoke of a struggle between life and death. Evangeline's fingers traced the voodoo symbols tattooed along her arms, each a history to her knowledge and power. The crow cawed again, a warning that time was slipping through her fingers like the sands of the hourglass. As the night deepened, Evangeline prepared for the ritual she had hoped never to perform. The ingredients were rare, the consequences dire, but her love for Sebastien was a force that transcended fear. The town's merriment continued, a sharp division to the solemnity of Evangeline's task. Gerard Moreau continued his vigil. Charlotte Vance laughed amidst friends, and the citizens of Saint-Denis reveled in ignorance of the tempest that would soon engulf them all. Evangeline knelt beside Sebastien, her eyes fixed upon his pallid face. "Forgive me for what I am about to do," she whispered. The room filled with the echoes of a love so profound that it would soon break the barriers between life and death, setting in motion a chain of events that none in the town of Saint-Denis could anticipate. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Evangeline began her incantation, her voice rising in a chant that was both a lament and a plea. The calm before the storm was at its end, and the world of Saint-Denis would never be the same. Chapter 2, Whispers of Fate. A pall settled over New Orleans, its vibrant hues dimming under the weight of an unspoken dread. The once jubilant calls of street vendors now carried a tremor, as if the very air vibrated with the whispers of portent. Even the Mississippi flowed with an ominous languor, its curring the unease that clung to the city like Spanish moss to ancient oaks. Evangeline, her slender form hunched over the flickering flames of her altar, watched as the wax from the candles bled away, leaving behind gnarled shapes that seemed to mock her efforts. She sought patterns in their contortions, a sign from the Loa that could guide her through the encroaching darkness. Her incantations, usually fluid and potent, now stumbled on a fear that constricted her throat. In the heart of the French Quarter, animals that once roamed with the indifference afforded by urban familiarity now skittered with a frantic energy. Cats with arched backs hissed at shadows that weren't there, and dogs whimpered with their tails tucked, sensing a shift that eluded their human counterparts. Charlotte, her athletic frame leaning against the mast of her docked ship, observed the erratic behavior of the gulls overhead. "Something's amiss," she said, her voice as crisp as the salt-laden breeze, her sky-blue eyes narrowing with concern. Beside her, the seasoned sailors nodded, their superstitions suddenly given weight by the birds' tumultuous dance. "Aye," one grizzled mariner agreed, his voice a raspy whisper. "The spirits are restless tonight." Back at the modest house on the bayou, Sebastien lay motionless, his once muscular form now a mere shadow of its former vitality. Evangeline's emerald eyes, usually a wellspring of resolve, now flickered with the flame of desperation as she traced her fingers over the voodoo symbols inked into her skin. The crow, her constant sentinel, cawed thrice, a warning, a sign, a knell. Evangeline's heart clenched, for she knew the meaning all too well. She turned to the decrepit book that lay open on her wooden table, its pages filled with ancient rites and forbidden knowledge. "I cannot let you slip from this world, Bastien," she murmured, her husky voice barely audible over the chorus of insects outside. "Not when I have the means to tether your spirit to mine." In the town square, Gerard Moreau, his stocky build an anchor amidst the rising tide of panic, watched the townsfolk with a hawk's intensity. His gruff voice cut through the murmurs like a saber. "We must remain vigilant. Fear breeds chaos." Yet, even as he spoke, the Iron Marshal's eyes betrayed a glint of uncertainty, for he too had noticed the aberrant behavior of nature and the peculiar stillness that had befallen the night. At a local tavern, the patrons huddled closer, their whispers coalescing into a hodgepodge of fear. Stories of omens and apparitions passed from lip to trembling lip, each tale more elaborate than the last. "Mark my words. The dead will walk for this fever breaks," an old crone declared, her voice a gravely omen that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard. Evangeline, unaware of the rumors spreading like wildfire through the city, focused on the task at hand. Her preparations for the ritual were meticulous, each step taken with a reverence that belied the enormity of her undertaking. As the night deepened, a hush fell over New Orleans, a city suspended between the revelry of life and the silence of the grave. Evangeline's home, a flare of flickering hope amidst the gathering gloom, stood ready to defy the whispers of fate. Within her haven, the voodoo priestess began to chant, her voice a sonorous plea to the spirits that governed the realms beyond. Sebastian's breaths grew fainter, his life force ebbing away as the energies of the world shifted in anticipation of the dawn that would bring with it a storm unlike any other. Chapter 3: Rebirth into Darkness. Under a malevolent moon, the bayou whispered secrets of the night as Evangeline's sanctuary became a crucible for forces beyond mortal ken. The air crackled with the energy of her desperate incantation, the hum of ancient power resonating with each syllable she uttered. Within the confines of her dwelling, the stillness was oppressive, the tension palpable as Sebastien lay on the cusp between worlds. The ritual, a shuffle of shadow and light, reached its crescendo, and with a final guttural cry from Evangeline, the veil was torn asunder. The crow, sentinel of omens, took flight into the night, its caw a lament for what had been wrought. Sebastian's eyes snapped open, steely no longer, but a milky hue of death. His first breath was a rasping gasp, a sound that chilled the marrow, more a resurrection of hunger than of life. The once robust sailor now bore the pallor of the grave, and with each shuddering rise of his chest, the nightmare of undeath took root. Evangeline recoiled, her heart a maelstrom of triumph and terror. She beheld the form of her beloved risen, but twisted into a grotesque parody of the man he once was. His gaze, devoid of recognition, now fixed on her with an insatiable longing that spoke only of hunger. "Bastien, my love, what have I done?" she murmured, her voice a husky whisper that trembled with the gravity of her deed. The first victim was a local, a jovial tanner named Jacques, who had been drawn to the commotion. As he crossed the threshold, the abomination that was once Sebastien lunged with a bestial snarl, teeth sinking into flesh with a savage finality. Jacques' scream pierced the night, a portent of the chaos to come, as the contagion of the damned spread through his veins like wildfire. In the town square, Gerard, his gruff voice now a bellow of command, summoned his men. To arms, he cried, the Iron Marshal sensing the unraveling of order, though ignorant of its cause. Charlotte, her heart pounding with an uncharacteristic fear, watched as the animals of the city fled in terror, their instincts heralding the onset of an apocalypse. The streets of New Orleans, once alive with music and revelry, now echoed with a turmoil of horror. Those first claimed by Sebastian's ravenous assault rose in turn, their humanity stripped away, leaving only ravenous husks driven by a primal urge to feast. Evangeline stood amidst the turmoil, her spirit animal's cries now a distant echo. Her arms, marked with the symbols of her craft, hung limply at her sides, the tools of her art rendered useless against the monstrosity she had unleashed. The once peaceful night was now a tableau of dread, each shadow pregnant with menace, each silence a prelude to screams. The bayou, a silent witness to the birth of this darkness, held its breath as the living became prey, and the dead became predators. Evangeline, her heart torn between the love she bore for Sebastien and the horror at what he had become, knew that the world she had known was lost. Her whispered words of power had been replaced with a silent prayer for salvation, a plea for forgiveness in the face of the abominable chaos she had birthed. The night wore on, a relentless march of terror as the contagion spread through the veins of New Orleans. Evangeline, once a beamer of hope and healing, now watched, paralyzed, as her love became the harbinger of doom. The city, a vibrant scramble of life, now unraveled thread by thread into the darkness of a nightmare made flesh. Chapter 4. Desperate Flight. Amidst the pandemonium that had seized the once tranquil town of Saint-Denis, Evangeline moved with a purpose that belied the chaos surrounding her. The ominous drum of the undead's approach was a macabre symphony to the hubbub of terror-stricken cries from her neighbors. Her home, once a sanctuary of spiritual practice, had become the epicenter of an unfathomable nightmare. Charlotte, having just moored her vessel at the docks, took in the scene with a seafarer's quick judgment. The streets were awash with the stumbling figures of the undead, their groans an unholy chorus against the night. She moved swiftly, her athletic frame cutting through the throng with an urgency born of necessity. "Evie," Charlotte called out as she spotted the voodoo priestess, her voice cutting through the mayhem with the sharpness of a ship's bell in a storm. Evangeline turned, her emerald eyes locking with Charlotte's sky-blue gaze. "Lottie, what in heaven's name are you doing here?" Evangeline asked, her normally husky and mesmerizing voice tinged with the strain of the unfolding horror. "I came to trade, but it seems I've sailed into hell itself," Charlotte replied, her crisp voice belying the gravity of their situation. "What's happened here?" "It's my doing," Evangeline confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to bring Bastien back, and in my folly I've damned us all." Charlotte's brows knitted in concern. "Then we must undo what's been done. Lead the way, Evie." Together, they navigated the narrow streets, an alliance forged in desperation. Evangeline, with her intimate knowledge of the arcane, and Charlotte, whose life at sea had honed her instincts for survival, made a formidable pair. They encountered a group of the recently turned, their familiar faces now twisted into grotesque masks of hunger. The creatures lunged with ragged nails and gnashing teeth, a grotesque mimicry of the townsfolk they once were. With a blend of voodoo incantations and Charlotte's deft maneuvering, they repelled the assault. But the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Evangeline. The sight of her neighbors, transformed into mindless monstrosities, was a stark illustration of the enormity of her actions. "We need to get to the church," Evangeline said, her voice steady despite the carnage that unfolded around them. "It's consecrated ground. It may afford us some protection." Charlotte nodded, her blonde hair now matted with the grime of combat. "Lead on, then. There's no time to waste." As they moved, Evangeline's mind raced with the possibility of a counter-ritual, something that could stem the tide of the undead. The knowledge she had used to resurrect Bastien could perhaps be twisted to a new purpose to contain the evil she had unleashed. Charlotte glanced at Evangeline, noting the determination etched into her features. If anyone can fix this, it's you, Evie. I've seen you bend the world to your will with nothing but a word and a gesture. Evangeline managed a wry smile, though it failed to reach her eyes. Let's hope the world's still willing to listen. They reached the church, its doors barricaded by those who had sought sanctuary within. Charlotte pounded on the heavy wood, her voice authoritative. Open up. We can help. A slit in the door revealed fearful eyes which widened in recognition. It's Vance, the navigator, and Dubois, the priestess. The doors creaked open, and the pair were ushered inside, where the air was thick with prayers and the scent of incense. The residents of Saint-Denis huddled together, their faces a clutter of fear and hope. Evangeline addressed them with a calm she did not feel. I know I've brought this curse upon us, but I swear on my life I will make it right. With Charlotte's help, we will find a way to end this. Murmurs of assent rose from the crowd, their faith in Evangeline's abilities a flickering flame in the encroaching darkness. Outside, the moans of the undead grew louder, a constant reminder of the threat that loomed just beyond the church's walls. Inside, Evangeline and Charlotte exchanged a look, an unspoken vow passing between them, a promise to face the darkness together and to restore light to a world plunged into chaos. Chapter 5, Shattered Sanctuary. Within the hallowed confines of the church, a sense of foreboding had settled like dust upon the once sacred chancel. Evangeline stood by the stained glass windows, the fragmented light casting kaleidoscopic patterns upon her face, her emerald eyes reflecting the myriad colors with a solemnity that spoke of her heavy heart. Charlotte, with her back pressed against the cold stone wall, scanned the faces of the survivors, each etched with their own tale of dread and desperation. The air was thick with the scent of incense and fear as the group huddled together, a makeshift family bound by the singular goal of outlasting the nightmare beyond those consecrated walls. Gerard, his military experience now a lighthouse of hope for the beleaguered townsfolk, strode forth with a determined gait, his full beard bristling as he spoke. We must shore up these defenses. Time is a luxury we no longer possess. Evangeline nodded, her slender fingers absently brushing against the voodoo symbols that adorned her arms. And I must find a way to end this curse. There must be a counter-ritual, some means to stem the tide. The survivors gathered, their weary bodies forming a semicircle around the pair, seeking solace in their plan. You speak of rituals, Evangeline, Charlotte began, her crisp voice carrying across the hushed murmurs. But what of the here and now? The undead are at our door, and we are but few. Evangeline met her gaze, a flicker of single-mindedness igniting within. Then we shall stand as a bulwark against the darkness. I've brought this upon us. I will not shirk from its undoing. A hush fell upon the room as the survivors exchanged glances, their fates intertwined with the witch and the mariner who had taken up their cause. Lottie, her athletic poise undiminished by the encroaching dread, stepped forward. We need to know each other's strengths if we are to survive. Speak your piece, share your tale. One by one, the survivors recounted their stories. Jacques, though bitten, had somehow staved off the transformation. His voice, once jovial, was now a hoarse whisper of its former self. I was a tanner, he rasped, and now I fear I am but a herald of our collective doom. Evangeline approached him, her stoicism giving way to a flicker of compassion. Your strength lies within, Jacques. You have resisted where others have fallen. There is hope yet. The Iron Marshal, watching the exchange, allowed himself a moment of introspection. I have fought many battles, he said, his gruff voice tinged with an unfamiliar softness. But this enemy, it knows no fear, no pain, no end. Amid the confessions and recountings, hints of past loves and aspirations rose to the surface, weaving a patchwork of lives interrupted. Gerard spoke of a woman he had once courted, a memory that now seemed a lifetime away. Lottie revealed her dream of charting unknown waters, a goal that felt foolish in the face of the present darkness. As the night stretched on, the survivors fortified the church with pews and confessionals, turning the place of worship into a fortress. Evangeline, her single-mindedness hardened by the shared stories, pored over her tomes and scrolls, her search for redemption as fervent as ever. Outside, the undead clawed at the walls, their groans a grim serenade to the struggle within. But inside, a fragile unity had taken root, a collective will to endure and to fight back against the abyss that had claimed their town. Evangeline finally stood, her eyes alight with a newfound determination. "I have found a path," she announced, her voice a clarion call amidst the uncertainty. "Together we shall walk it. Together we shall reclaim our lives from the grip of this darkness." The survivors, bolstered by her words, readied themselves for the trials ahead. In the shattered sanctuary of the church, a plan was forged, a rebellion kindled, as the first rays of dawn heralded a day of reckoning. Chapter 6: The World Upside Down. The once vibrant city of New Orleans lay in tatters, a macabre shadow of its former glory. The streets, once an aggregate of colors and sounds, now bore the monochrome hue of desolation. Evangeline, Charlotte, Gerard, and the band of survivors threaded their way through the debris, each step a demonstration to the world's cruel inversion. Evangeline, her tattoos hidden beneath the folds of her cloak, scanned the ruins with a discerning gaze. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon her, the need to rectify the calamity she had wrought, battling with the urgent necessity to lead the group to safety. Charlotte, her compass in hand, navigated the labyrinth of destruction, her once adventurous spirit now commandeered by the urgent priority of survival. "We should avoid the market district," she advised, her voice a balefire of reason amidst the chaos. "It's likely to be a hotbed for those things." Gerard, following closely behind, kept a vigilant watch. His military past had prepared him for many things, but the grotesque reality before him defied all logic and training. "We're not the only ones moving through the city," he intoned, his eyes catching the flicker of movement in the periphery. Survivors or the damned? A harsh encounter was inevitable. As they rounded a corner, they came upon a barricade manned by a group of survivors whose eyes were wild with fear and mistrust. The leader, a burly man with a makeshift weapon clutched in his hands, stepped forward. "State your intentions," he demanded, his voice betraying the edge of desperation that underpinned their fragile existence. Evangeline stepped forward, her stoic demeanor a mask for the turmoil within. "We seek passage," she replied evenly. "Our aim is to find a cure for the sake of all." The man's eyes narrowed. "A cure? You some kind of witch?" he accused, his gaze flicking to the symbols barely visible on Evangeline's skin. Charlotte intervened, her calmness belying the tension of the standoff. "She's our best hope. We've seen what she can do. Let us through, and we'll share any breakthroughs." The leader's suspicion lingered, but the desperation of his group won out. With a curt nod, he signaled for the barricade to be opened. "Move quickly, and cause no trouble," he warned. As they passed through, Evangeline turned to Charlotte, her husky voice lowering to a whisper. "Thank you, Lottie. Your words may have spared us bloodshed." Charlotte's response was a wry smile. "Just steering the ship, Evie. We're all in this tempest together." The journey continued, a relentless progression through a cityscape that bore the scars of an apocalypse. The group's need for safety was a constant drumbeat against the larger mission that drove Evangeline. An abandoned church provided a temporary haven, its once sacred interior now a refuge for the living. As they fortified their position, the conversation turned to the future, to plans etched in uncertainty. "We can't stay here long," Gerard stated, his experience lending authority to his words. "Supplies are dwindling, and the undead are numerous." Evangeline acknowledged the truth of his words. "I know," she conceded, "but we must also think of a cure. Without it, there's no end to this." The group fell silent, the gravity of their situation a heavy shroud. Choices loomed, each more daunting than the last, their path a forking road with no clear destination. In the dim light of the church, the survivors shared their stories, their past romances and personal ambitions now bittersweet memories in the face of their grim reality. As the day waned, the group came to a decision. Evangeline would continue her search for a cure, but not at the expense of their immediate safety. Plans were made to scout for resources and potential allies, a course charted through the treacherous waters of a world turned upside down. The night fell, a curtain of darkness draping over the city. In the silence of the church, Evangeline's whispered incantations mingled with the prayers of the survivors, a chorus of hope and determination rising against the symphony of despair that gripped New Orleans. Chapter 7: Dwindling Hope. The sun rose over the desecrated city, casting a harsh light on the remnants of what once was a bustling hub of life and laughter. In stark opposition to the day's growing brightness, a shadow hung over Evangeline and her weary band of survivors in the church-turned fortress. The once abundant provisions were now a collection of meager rations, each portion a stark reminder of the dire straits they found themselves in. Gerard paced the length of the nave, his once commanding presence diminished by the gnawing uncertainty of their predicament. His eyes, dark pools of resolve, caught those of Evangeline, who was hunched over her ancient texts, her search for a cure as relentless as ever. "We cannot sustain on hope alone, Evangeline," Gerard said, his voice a gruff echo in the cavernous space. "The food dwindles, and our numbers only grow. We must act." Evangeline looked up, her gaze weary yet resolute. "I am aware of our circumstances," she replied with a measured calmness. "But without a cure, what future do we hope to sustain?" Charlotte interjected, her tone pragmatic as she unfolded a tattered map across a makeshift table. "We need to scout for supplies for other survivors. If there are others out there, they may have found ways to endure." The group gathered around the map, each pair of eyes scanning the lines and contours, searching for a lifeline amidst the chaos. Jacques, his voice a hoarse whisper of its former self, pointed to a cluster of buildings on the outskirts. There was a shelter there, a safe haven. If it still stands, it may hold the provisions we need. Tension hung in the air as the survivors considered this glimmer of possibility. The decision to venture out was fraught with peril, but the alternative was to remain and face the certainty of starvation. The group set out, navigating the treacherous streets with vigilance, the ever-present threat of the undead a constant companion. The city was a graveyard of ambitions and dreams, its silence a requiem for the fallen. The shelter, when they found it, was a tomb. The barricades had been breached, and the remnants of those who had sought refuge within were a sobering testament to the fragility of their own sanctuary. The sight ignited a spark of discord among the group. Some argued for an immediate return, while others insisted on scouring the ruins for anything that could aid their survival. "It's a fool's errand to linger," one survivor muttered, casting nervous glances at the shadows that seemed to shift with malevolent intent. Evangeline, her heart heavy with the weight of their reality, knelt beside the remains of a fallen defender of the shelter, the scene a harrowing reflection of her inner turmoil. "We must gather what we can," she stated, her voice cutting through the murmurs of dissent. "We owe it to those who have perished to continue the fight for life." The search was a grim affair, each discovery a stark reminder of the world they had lost. Tinned foods, medical supplies, and the occasional weapon were salvaged from the detritus, the spoils of their grim harvest, a meager bolster to their flagging hopes. As the shadows lengthened and the group prepared to return, the simmering tension erupted. Accusations flew, the stress of their situation tearing at the bonds that had held them together. "You talk of cures and fighting back," spat one survivor, his gaze accusing as he faced Evangeline. "But what of the living? Your quest has blinded you to our needs." Evangeline stood, facing her accuser with a stoicism that masked the maelstrom within. "I have not forgotten the living," she replied, her voice steady. "But we cannot abandon the hope for a true end to this curse." Charlotte stepped in, her authoritative voice a balm to the frayed nerves. "We survive together, or not at all. Evangeline's search for a cure is for all our sakes. We must not let fear divide us." The journey back was a silent procession, each survivor lost in their own thoughts. The scant supplies they had gathered were a temporary reprieve, but the underlying truth remained: without a cure, their future was a dwindling hope, a candle flickering in the all-consuming darkness of their new reality. Chapter 8: Fragile Bonds. In the wake of a world turned upside down, trust had become as scarce as the food and ammunition the survivors scavenged. Evangeline and Charlotte, their bonds solidified by shared trials, navigated the treacherous landscape of human interaction with cautious steps. The introduction of new survivors brought a flicker of hope, but the flame was vulnerable to the winds of deceit. Gerard Moreau, known to some as the Iron Marshal for his stern leadership and unyielding strategies, stood before the group, his presence commanding despite the wear of recent days. His salt and pepper hair was an attestation to his experience, while the jagged scar across his brow spoke of battles past. "We can fortify this place," Gerard asserted, his voice gruff, his dark brown eyes scanning the makeshift defenses. "But we need to be smart about our resources, and that might mean making hard choices." Evangeline, her arms folded, regarded Gerard with a mixture of appreciation and skepticism. "We've all had to make difficult decisions lately," she replied, her voice retaining the husky timbre that often soothed anxious hearts. "But at what cost do these choices come?" Charlotte, standing beside her friend, nodded in agreement. "We've seen what happens when desperation takes the helm. We cannot lose our humanity in the fight to preserve it." The survivors gathered in the dim light of the church, the stained glass windows now just remnants of a shattered past. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering candles, were etched with the stories of 100 sleepless nights. Gerard paced in front of the group, his boots echoing on the stone floor. "I've led men into the heart of darkness before. This is no different. We survive by any means necessary." A murmur of assent rose from a faction of the survivors, those who had seen the worst of the outbreak and yearned for the security promised by a military hand. Yet in the eyes of others, there was a glint of fear. The question hung unspoken in the air. What was the price of survival under Gerard's command? As the group deliberated, Charlotte pulled Evangeline aside, her voice low but urgent. "Evie, there's a ruthlessness in him that chills my blood. What if his methods bring more harm than good?" Evangeline's emerald eyes met Charlotte's concerned gaze. "I share your worries, Lottie, but we need his experience. We must be vigilant, yes, but also open to the strength he brings." The conversation turned to the allocation of rations, the watch schedule, and the looming threat of the undead that clawed at their sanctuary's doors. Through it all, the undercurrent of discord threaded its way through the dialogue, an insidious whisper that threatened to unravel the fragile bonds they had formed. Gerard's voice rose above the rest, his tone brooking no argument. "We ration the food, double the watches, and eliminate any threat, be it undead or otherwise. We can't afford to be sentimental." Evangeline's heart ached at the words, the implications clear and sharp as a blade. Her search for a cure had always been as much about saving the soul of the town as it was about saving lives. Now, she feared the soul was slipping away. As the meeting disbanded, the survivors retreated to their thoughts and the scant comfort of their cots. Evangeline and Charlotte remained, the silent communion between them a bastion against the growing unease. "The world may be upside down, Evie," Charlotte whispered, "but I'm glad you're here to navigate it with me." Evangeline's response was a faint smile, a silent vow that no matter the cost, she would not let the darkness change who she was. Together with Charlotte, she would stand sentinel over the humanity of their group, even as suspicions of Gerard's true intentions grew like thorns around their hearts. Chapter 9: Shifting Shadows. The damp chill of the evening air hung heavily in the abandoned warehouse that the survivors had commandeered as their latest stronghold. The walls, once echoing with the industry of a thriving port business, now stood as silent sentinels to the group's desperate plight. Tensions had been simmering beneath the surface, and tonight they threatened to boil over. Evangeline's figure was a study in concentration as she hunched over the weathered pages of her ancient grimoires, the candlelight casting a flickering glow on her raven-black hair. Her quest to reverse the horror she had unleashed upon the world had never been more critical. But the cost of her singular focus was becoming increasingly apparent. Charlotte watched her friend from across the room. The navigator's typically crisp voice carried a note of concern as she spoke. "Evie, you've been at this for hours. You need to rest." Evangeline shook her head, her emerald eyes not leaving the text. "There's no time, Lottie. Each moment we delay, Sebastien slips further away." Charlotte sighed, her athletic frame leaning against a rusted support beam. "I understand, but we're no good to him or anyone if we break ourselves against this unyielding darkness." Their exchange was interrupted by a commotion near the warehouse entrance. Gerard stood there, his stocky form blocking the light from the doorway as he engaged in a heated conversation with Jacques, the tanner whose fortitude had thus far kept him human despite the bite. You can't be serious, Gerard. Jacques' raspy voice carried a note of disbelief. We can't just turn our backs on the rest of the town. There are still people out there. Gerard's gruff response was unyielding. We need to focus on our own survival. The town is lost. It's only a matter of time before they breach our defenses here. The others gathered around, drawn by the argument. The Iron Marshal's ruthless pragmatism had long been a source of contention, but never had it so starkly opposed the group's remaining threads of hope. Evangeline stood, her presence commanding attention despite her slender frame. We cannot abandon those in need. Our humanity is all we have left in this forsaken place. Gerard met her gaze, his dark brown eyes hard as flint. And what of your humanity when your beloved is the one tearing us apart? How far will you go for him, Evangeline? A murmur of assent rippled through some of the survivors, their faith in Evangeline's leadership shaken by the reminder of her role in their current predicament. The tension was palpable, a living entity that coiled around each survivor, constricting tighter with every passing moment. It was then that the betrayal unfolded, a cruel twist of fate orchestrated by one whose fear had festered into treachery. In the chaos of accusations and distrust, one of the survivors seized the moment to strike a devil's bargain with a roving band of marauders outside. The warehouse, once a place of refuge, erupted into anarchy as the traitor flung open the gates, allowing the undead, and worse, the living who had surrendered to their basest instincts to pour in. Gerard leapt into action, his military training kicking in as he barked orders, attempting to marshal the survivors into a defense. But the damage was done. In the melee, Jacques, the steadfast tanner, fell to the ravenous horde, his final gurgled cry a chilling testament to the cost of fear and division. Evangeline and Charlotte fought back to back, their bond a tenuous lifeline amidst the bedlam. But as the night wore on, and the shadows in the warehouse grew longer and more sinister, the realization dawned on Evangeline that her personal mission might very well sunder the fragile alliance she had with Charlotte. As dawn approached, the survivors took stock of their losses. The warehouse was no longer safe, their numbers were diminished, and trust, once broken, seemed irreparable. Evangeline faced Charlotte, her expression haunted by the night's horrors. I cannot abandon him, Lottie. If there's a chance to save Sebastien, to undo this curse, I must take it. Charlotte's response was a mix of frustration and understanding. I know, Evie, and I'll stand with you, but not at the expense of what we've built here. We can't let fear dictate our actions. The chapter closed on a group divided, their unity shattered by the night's events. The shadows within their hearts had shifted, revealing the stark truth that the real battle lay not just beyond the warehouse walls, but within the very souls of those who had survived to see the dawn. Chapter 10, The Last Stand. Dusk descended like a shroud over the beleaguered city, the dying light casting long shadows across the battered walls of the stronghold. Evangeline stood atop the ramparts, her silhouette etched against the blood-red sky, the voodoo symbols on her arms stark in the fading light. Below her, Charlotte marshaled the survivors, her authoritative tone belying the churn of dread in her gut. We've got one chance at this, folks, Charlotte called out, her gaze sweeping over the faces that looked to her for direction. Fortify every entrance, barricade every window. Tonight, we stand together, or not at all. The air was electric with tension, charged by the knowledge that the undead horde was a relentless tide poised to crash upon them. Gerard, his jaw set in a determined line, distributed the last of their ammunition, his scar a stark reminder of the battles already fought. Conserve your shots, he instructed, his voice gruff. Aim for the head. Make each one count. Evangeline descended from her perch, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and incantations. The weight of her previous choice to resurrect Sebastien hung heavy on her heart, a specter of doubt that clouded her judgment. Charlotte approached, her sun-kissed hair pulled back in a pragmatic ponytail, her sky-blue eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. Evie, are you truly considering using that dark magic again? After all it's cost us? Evangeline's emerald eyes met Charlotte's, a storm of emotions swirling within. I may have no other choice, Lottie. If the horde breaks through, it's not just our lives at stake, it's our very souls. Charlotte placed a firm hand on Evangeline's shoulder. then we'll fight with everything we have. But let's not cross that line unless there's no other way. The survivors took their positions, each person a vital link in the chain that bound them to life. The sound of the approaching horde, a blare of groans and the shuffling of countless feet, grew louder, a sinister drumbeat that promised destruction. Gerard took his place beside Evangeline and Charlotte, his full beard bristling as he peered into the encroaching darkness. "They're nearly upon us," he said, his voice a rumble of contained power. "Ready yourselves." The first of the undead emerged from the gloom, their eyes hollow, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. But behind them, more came, a sea of decay that threatened to engulf the stronghold. The defenders opened fire, the crack of gunshots punctuating the night. Each fallen zombie was quickly replaced by another, the horde an unending stream of death. As the battle raged, Evangeline's heart raced with the knowledge that the dark magic coursing through her veins could turn the tide. But at what cost? To call upon the Loa again could mean damning the very people she sought to protect. Charlotte, reloading her weapon with practiced hands, caught Evangeline's hesitation. "Don't do it, Evie. We can hold them." Evangeline's purposefulness wavered as she watched a young survivor, no more than a boy, dragged down by the ravenous undead. The sight ignited a fire within her, a primal urge to protect her makeshift family at all costs. With a cry that was both a plea and a command, Evangeline raised her arms, the tattoos glowing with an eldritch light. The air around her crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality bending to her will. The horde faltered, the front line of zombies collapsing as if struck by an invisible force. But the victory was short-lived, as the magic exacted its price. A deep weariness settled into Evangeline's bones, and she swayed, nearly losing her footing. Charlotte rushed to her side, her face etched with concern. "Evie, what have you done?" Evangeline's voice was a husky whisper, strained by the effort of her spell. I've given us a chance, Lottie. That's all we ever have." The night wore on, a relentless onslaught that tested the limits of their endurance. The stronghold, a bastille against the night, held firm against the tide of undead. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the survivors stood battered but unbroken, their unity forged in the fires of their last stand. Evangeline looked out over the carnage, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the battle was won, but the war was far from over. Her path forward was uncertain, her alliance with Charlotte strained by the darkness she had courted. But for now, they were alive, and in the world of haunted hearts, that was the closest thing to victory they could claim. Chapter 11, Shattered Defenses. Morning light pierced the remnants of the church's stained glass, casting a kaleidoscope of fractured hues over the weary band of survivors. The aftermath of the siege lay heavy upon them, a palpable silence more profound than the preceding dissonance of the horde. Amongst the scattered pews and barricades, Evangeline stood, a solitary figure amidst the ruin, her raven black hair a bold demarcation to the pallor of her skin. She bore the weight of the night's decisions, and the air around her trembled with the gravity of what was to come. Charlotte, her countenance a blend of exhaustion and resolve, approached her friend, her boots crunching over debris. "Evie," she started, her voice a token to the night's toll, "you've done what few could dare." But at what cost? Evangeline's response was a whisper, carried on a breeze that sighed through the shattered windows. A cost too dear for any soul to pay. "Sebastien, I can no longer deny what must be done." Gerard, his posture betraying a rare vulnerability, overheard the exchange and added his voice to the dawn's quietude. "We've all paid in blood and sorrow, yet here we stand. There's hope in that, however faint." The three surveyed their surroundings, the sanctuary now a grim canvas of their defense's ferocity. The bodies of the fallen, both undead and ally, were stark reminders of the siege's brutality. Evangeline's gaze lingered on the figure of Sebastien, his form still and silent, bound by the very magics she had woven in desperation. "I cannot allow this abomination to persist," she declared, her heart heavy with the impending farewell. "It is time to grant him peace." Charlotte reached out, her touch a solace amidst the desolation. "Then let us do what must be done, together. His memory deserves that much." The somber task of laying Sebastien to rest was a silent ceremony, an intimate farewell beneath the watchful eyes of those who remained. Evangeline's incantations were soft, a litany of love and release, as she undid the spell that had bound his soul to an unliving husk. As the day wore on, the survivors took to the necessary work of fortifying their defenses once more. In the quiet moments of labor, exchanges between Evangeline and Charlotte hinted at a depth to their relationship that had grown in the crucible of survival. "Do you ever think of a life beyond these walls, Evie?" Charlotte asked, her hands working to clear the debris. Evangeline paused, allowing herself a moment to dream. "I think of verdant fields and open skies, of a world untouched by this darkness." "And you, Lottie, do you see a horizon in your future?" Charlotte's smile was wistful, her sky-blue eyes reflecting a yearning for the boundless sea. "I see sails unfurled and the kiss of salt on the wind. But I also see you, Evie, standing beside me as we chart a course to safer shores." Their conversation was a fleeting escape, a brief respite from the grim reality that encased them. Yet it was enough to rekindle a flame of hope, suggesting a future where their bond could flourish untested by the horrors they faced. The chapter closed with the stronghold's battered defenders, their spirits bruised but unyielding. Evangeline, having let go of one chapter of her life, now faced the uncertainty of the next. And within the walls of their refuge, amidst the sorrow and loss, the seeds of a complicated yet profound connection between her and Charlotte found fertile ground, promising to grow amidst the ruins of a world they once knew. Chapter 12, Heart of Darkness. The remnants of the church stood silent, a hollow echo of sanctuary amidst the pervasive decay that had claimed the city. Within its walls, Evangeline faced the profound void left by her own doing, a darkness that had seeped into her soul, a lament for the love she had twisted into something monstrous. Charlotte, her presence a steadfast constant, watched over her friend with a concern that had deepened with each passing day. "Evie," she began, her voice a measured cadence in the stillness, "we can't let the night consume us. Not when we fought so hard to see the dawn." Evangeline's gaze was distant, her thoughts adrift in the turbulent sea of her choices. "It's not the night I fear, Charlotte. It's the darkness within me, the one that beckoned me to damnation for a chance at love." Charlotte moved closer, her silhouette framed by the fractured light that danced through the broken stained glass. "Love can lead us to folly, but it can also guide us back. You had the courage to love fiercely, Evie. Now, have the courage to let go." The silence that followed was a tribute to the weight of their conversation, a dialogue of souls entwined by circumstance and bound by the unspoken oath to weather the storm together. It was Gerard who shattered the contemplative quiet, his voice carrying the gravitas of the iron marshal he once was. "The boy, he's changed. You need to see this." With a heavy heart, Evangeline followed Gerard, her steps echoing through the church like the tolling of a funeral bell. Sebastien, her beloved, now stood before her, a grotesque reflection of the man she adored. His once vibrant eyes were hollow pools of hunger, his posture a parody of the living. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat as she beheld the ruin of her heart's desire. "Sebastien," she whispered, "the name a prayer, a curse, a benediction all at once." Sebastian's response was a guttural moan, a sound that tore through Evangeline like a blade. She knew then what she had to do, what love truly demanded of her. Charlotte's hand found Evangeline's, a lifeline in the maelstrom of her anguish. "I'm with you, Evie. Whatever you decide, I stand by you." The decision lay heavy upon Evangeline's shoulders, a mantle of thorns that she must bear alone. With an incantation that was both a release and a farewell, she reached deep into the wellspring of her power, her voice rising in a chant that was older than the bayou itself. A warm light enveloped Sebastien, a soft glow that spoke of peace and release. His form shuddered, a final spasm as the spell that had bound him to this half-life unraveled, allowing his spirit to slip the bonds of the corporeal plane. As the light faded, Evangeline collapsed, her strength spent, her heart emptied of the shadows that had haunted her. In that moment of profound loss, she felt Charlotte's arms around her, a reminder that even in the depths of despair, hope flickered, a candle defiant in the encroaching dark. Gerard stood watch, his own heart a battlefield of admiration and sorrow for the priestess who had dared to love too well. "We'll stand guard, Evie. You've earned your rest." Charlotte helped Evangeline to her feet, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange that spoke volumes. In the heart of darkness, they had found a glimmer of light, and with it, the strength to face whatever the morrow might bring. Chapter 13, Dawn of Resolve. The first rays of daylight sifted through the shattered remains of stained glass, casting mottled patterns upon the weary assembly gathered within the sanctuary's remnants. Evangeline stood before them, her silhouette a pronounced discrepancy against the burgeoning light that heralded a new day. "Look upon this morn with clear eyes," Evangeline addressed the group, her voice a sonorous blend of command and empathy. "We stand upon the precipice of a world reborn from its own ashes. We must decide now how we shape the future." Charlotte, her resolution manifest in her upright posture, nodded in agreement. "We've weathered the tempest, watched the pillars of our former lives crumble. Yet here we are, not merely survivors, but custodians of the next chapter." The survivors, a diverse congregation of the once disparate citizens of New Orleans, exchanged glances, some filled with trepidation, others with a nascent spark of determination. Gerard, his visage etched with the toll of leadership, stepped forward. "Evangeline speaks true. We've been given a chance to forge a new path, but it's a road that demands the best of us, our wits, our resolve, and our unity." His words hung in the air, a challenge to the specters of despair and division that had haunted their every step since the outbreak. Evangeline's gaze swept across the faces of her companions, each a testimony to the indomitable spirit of humankind. "Let us take stock of what we have, of what we've lost. Let the memory of those who've fallen be the bedrock upon which we build." The group dispersed, engaging in the solemn task of inventory, noting the scant resources that remained, the weapons that had sustained them, and the medicines that had become more precious than gold. Charlotte approached Evangeline, her blue eyes reflecting the gravity of their situation. "We'll need to scout beyond the church, find fertile ground, sources of clean water, and seeds to sow. It's time to think beyond mere survival." Evangeline met her gaze, acknowledging the wisdom in her words. "Indeed, Charlotte, we've been given a rare opportunity. The earth is reclaiming what was hers, and we must learn to live alongside her, not in dominion over her." Their conversation was interrupted by a young girl no more than 12, her eyes wide with the earnestness of youth. "Miss Evangeline, will there be schools again? Will we learn about the stars, the seas, and all the stories?" Evangeline knelt before the child, her heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow for the innocence lost and hope for the innocence preserved. "Yes, child, there will be schools and stories and all the wonders of the world to discover. We will ensure it." As the day progressed, the survivors cleared the debris, tending to the wounded and laying the dead to rest with reverence. The church, a bastille against the darkness, began to transform under their hands, a metamorphosis from mausoleum to cradle of rebirth. By evening, a plan had been etched into the fabric of their community. Scouting parties were formed, each tasked with a facet of their collective survival, seeking potable water, arable land, and perhaps other pockets of humanity. Evangeline and Charlotte stood side by side as dusk painted the sky with hues of crimson and gold, the day's end a painterly capstone to their resolve. "We walk this path together," Charlotte, Evangeline affirmed, her voice a susurrus amidst the evening's chorus of crickets and night birds. Charlotte's hand found Evangeline's, their fingers intertwining, a physical manifestation of their bond. Together, Evie, into the dawn, into the future. The chapter closed with the sanctuary bathed in the afterglow of sunset, the survivors' faces cast in a ruddy light that seemed to whisper of the fire within them. The heart of darkness that had once threatened to consume them was now the crucible in which their collective will was forged, a will to rebuild, to learn, to thrive. And in that shared will, a new dawn awaited, full of promise and laden with the responsibility of those who had endured the night. Chapter 14, The Ruins of Yesterday. Amidst the remnants of a city whose heartbeats were now silent, the survivors ventured forth with a cautious air of trepidation. The once bustling avenues of New Orleans lay before them, a welter of desolation and the echoes of chaos, now quieted by the durability of those who remained. As the sun crested over the horizon, casting a golden sheen onto the fractured skyline, Evangeline surveyed the landscape. It was a poignant reminder of what once had been, a covenant to human achievement and now human endurance. Charlotte walked beside her, her gaze lingering on the broken facades of buildings, the empty windows like eyes that had witnessed too much. "We're charting a course through uncharted waters," she remarked, the timbre of her voice carrying the weight of their shared history. Evangeline nodded, her eyes reflecting the dawn's luminescence. "But sail we must, for the alternative is to sink into the abyss that nearly claimed us." Gerard joined the pair, his military bearing softened by the shared purpose that now united them all. "We begin with remembrance," he suggested, his tone one of solemnity. "For those we've lost, for the city that cradled our hopes." The suggestion resonated with the group, a collective need to acknowledge the past before moving forward. A ceremony took shape in the shadow of the cathedral, a hallowed space where the names of the fallen were recited with reverence, their memories honored with the lighting of candles that flickered against the encroaching daylight. "It's not just about looking back," Evangeline said as she addressed the gathering, her voice carrying the essence of leadership that had emerged from the crucible of survival. "It's about the foundation we lay here today for tomorrow's children and all the days to follow." Charlotte stood by her side, her hand resting lightly on Evangeline's arm, a quiet show of support. "We plant the seeds of a new society," she added, her words painting a vision of hope, one where knowledge, compassion, and community are the pillars that sustain us. As the ceremony concluded, the survivors dispersed, each to their role in the reclamation of their city. Teams were formed to clear the streets, to salvage what could be reused, and to scout for supplies amidst the urban wilderness. In the midst of the activity, Evangeline found herself beside a small group of children, their faces smeared with the grime of their new reality, yet their eyes alight with curiosity. "What will we do today, Miss Evangeline?" one child asked, her voice a fragile bird song amidst the stillness. Evangeline knelt before them, her expression gentle. "Today, we learn. We learn about the plants that grow from the soil, the way the rivers flow to the sea, and how the stars guide us at night." The child's eyes widened, a spark of wonder kindling within. "Will there be stories, too?" "Always," Evangeline assured her with a soft smile. "Stories are the threads that bind us together, that weave the conglomerate of our past into the future." Charlotte watched the exchange, her heart swelling with pride for the woman who had become the cornerstone of their new world. She approached Evangeline, her words for her alone. "You're creating something beautiful from the ruins, Evie." Evangeline looked up, meeting Charlotte's gaze. "Not I, Charlotte. We. This is our conglomerate to weave." The day waned, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting the city in a ruddy glow. As night fell, the survivors gathered once more, this time not in remembrance, but in celebration of the life that continued to pulse through their veins, of the community that was blossoming from the ruins of yesterday. Evangeline and Charlotte stood together, their hands clasped, their faces turned toward the emerging stars. Around them, the seeds of a new society took root, fostered by their care, promising a tomorrow filled with growth and healing in the aftermath of a world forever changed. Chapter 15, Horizons Anew. The remnants of dawn's embrace lingered on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the assembly of souls gathered amid the ruins of Saint-Denis. The air, once filled with the dissonance of terror, was now suffused with the solemn murmur of a community on the brink of transformation. Evangeline, her countenance marked by the wisdom of trials endured, stood at the heart of the gathering, her gaze encompassing the faces of those who had become her kin in survival. Charlotte, a pillar of strength and unshakable support, remained close, her keen eyes observing the congregation with a navigator's precision. "We find ourselves at a crossroads," Evangeline began, her voice resonant with the gravity of their collective journey. "The echoes of the past may haunt us, but it is the choices of today that will sculpt our tomorrow." Charlotte nodded, stepping forward to address the crowd. "The city we once knew is forever altered," she acknowledged, "yet within these altered streets beats the heart of a community unyielded." Murmurs of assent rippled through the survivors as Gerard, his stance reflecting his military past, joined the discourse. "We've defended these walls with vigor. Now we must decide whether to rebuild them or venture beyond to seek new horizons." The viewpoint struck a chord, igniting a fervent exchange among the survivors. Some advocated for the comfort of familiar ruins, while others yearned for the promise of uncharted lands. Evangeline listened, her mind adrift in the possibility of ancient voodoo texts she had once studied, texts that whispered of cures and knowledge hidden in the annals of time. There is wisdom in our heritage, she interjected thoughtfully, wisdom that may hold the key to preventing future calamity. Charlotte watched her closely, a knowing look in her eyes. "And what of us, Evie?" she questioned gently. "Do we anchor ourselves to this place, or do we embark on a quest for understanding that may lead us into the unknown?" The exchange between the two women was not lost on the others, who fell into a respectful hush, recognizing the weight of their leader's words. "It is not simply a decision of geography," Evangeline responded, her voice imbued with an earnest passion. "It is a choice between the comfort of the known and the risk that comes with seeking deeper truths." As the sun climbed higher, bathing the city in a light that seemed to bestow a blessing upon their deliberations, the survivors found unity in the shared desire for a future free from the shadows of yesterday. It was decided they would fortify Saint-Denis, cultivate its land, and nurture its people, while a chosen few, led by Evangeline and Charlotte, would venture forth in search of ancient wisdom. The day waned into evening, and the survivors dispersed, each to their task, each with a role in the shamble of rebirth. Evangeline and Charlotte remained, their silhouettes outlined against the deepening sky. "We stand on the threshold of a new era," Charlotte mused, her thoughts reaching towards the expansive sea that mirrored the vastness of their endeavor. Evangeline's eyes were alight with the spark of a nascent dream, the contours of a journey that would transcend the physical boundaries of their reclaimed city. "Onward to horizons anew, where the pursuit of knowledge beckons," she affirmed, her voice a steady signpost in the twilight. The chapter, and with it the tale of haunted hearts, drew to a close with the image of two indomitable spirits, hand in hand, gazing out at the world that lay before them. Their story, etched in the annals of survival, was an affirmation to the enduring human spirit, forever striving towards the intellectual breakthroughs that await just beyond the bounds of the known. The end. It's been an honor to have you with us for Haunted Hearts. StoryWave AI has the unique gift of turning your prompts into engrossing tales. Please leave a like, share with your circle, and subscribe to our channel for a new story every day. April 2024. Until our paths cross again.